This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got a very interesting guest for you today coming from New York City, Tim O'Hearn, and he is a rogue software engineer, and he wrote a interesting book on Amazon titled Framed, and it's a villain's perspective on social media. And we're going to talk all about his perspective, why he wrote the book, what it means, and the problems with big tech. And I'm really happy to have him on the show to discuss with him his thought leadership around this idea and the problems with social media, big tech, etc. So, Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Christopher. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Briefly introduce your background and then to dive into your work.
Sure. So my name's Tim O'Hearn. I've been a software engineer for about 10 years now. My primary employment has actually been in quantitative trading. So quite a bit different from social media, but something I began doing seriously in 2017 was helping people get more followers on social media platforms, primarily Instagram. So what some of this side hustle led to was a totally different realm of marketing, a different realm of software engineering. And I learned a lot about the underbelly of social media, not just what we experience there, but a lot of these odd push and pull types of conflicts that are even being had at the highest levels of the companies themselves. So all of this was wrapped up and put into a book, which was published last month called Framed, A Villain's Perspective on Social Media.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll start off by just exploring the underbelly of the social media world. And so that leads to MySpace, which is the precursor to everything, and how it led to the chaos of social media in the late 2010.
Yeah, for sure. I think MySpace is a really useful starting point. The most dedicated internet historians would tell you that MySpace wasn't the first platform. The hypothesis that I push in my book is that MySpace was the first platform that mattered. And it mattered not just from the cultural standpoint, which there's still some things for MySpace that are prevalent, but it's really from how we began to view social metrics as something that was deeply valuable, and how we started to exhibit certain antisocial behaviors in accumulating those metrics. So MySpace was the first platform where people went to extremes to get more followers, or in that case, friends. And then towards the end of MySpace's, really toward the end of its journey there, we had software services emerging that facilitated gaining friends and followers. And those things then formed the basis of the craziness of later platforms, primarily Instagram.
Yeah. And we'll dive into, because you helped to engineer these addictive technology systems at social media startups. And my question for you is, I feel like, for example, TikTok, that was really easy to grow on, and now you see what happened, or Clubhouse, that was really easy, and now it's overtaken by, or even like LinkedIn. LinkedIn now they want more views and things, but it seems like social media is working against you. The more you post on Instagram, like the less views you get. And what from your work engineering these algorithms, what have you exposed in the book Framed?
Sure. I think a lot of what you've experienced is true. And there are legions of people on the internet complaining about the same thing. Oh, hey, when even YouTube, right, was first out, there was a really good stretch there where it was easy to grow. Same with Instagram, same with TikTok, and same with even Twitter through its multiple iterations here. Now, even those like yourself who have built up very long post histories, you have a lot of organic followers and legitimate interest in your content, you're probably seeing less reach than you were even a year or two ago. The unique perspective I have is that rather than working at Meta or working at Twitter or X, I worked at a much smaller social media startup where there were very few engineers, which meant someone like me from a more senior like leadership background was able to build some of these algorithms from the ground up. So thinking about what is a recommendation algorithm, what constitutes what in your feed as you swipe or as you scroll, and then if you were to make a post, how do we both facilitate that post reaching some people while also trying to convince that customer to buy ad space? And really what you're seeing, my learning there, because the company I worked at was so young, it never ran ads. What you're seeing in these news feeds is that they've been co-opted as an advertising vehicle. So that type of exposure that you crave and that you once got now can only be achieved by running advertisements, even if your content, and specifically your content, is actually highly engaging, very compelling. It's just not shown to as many people organically as it once was.
Interesting. And we talk about they basically want you to spend more time. It's basically like reminds me of like casino. It's the longer you stay, the less you get, and they lure you in by these big rewards initially, and then they like cut you off and make you dependent on them. What about when you mentioned like these algorithms showing you feeds and things that you spend more time on or you like or engage, or even I think sometimes your iPhone is listening to your conversations because sometimes the same things like pop up after you hang out with your friends or you talk with your spouse and things. What about disinformation and misinformation and kind of this GameStop phenomenon or this January 6th type issue? Talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I think one aspect of the feeds in them becoming algorithmically curated is that we began to take for granted this concept of truth and newsworthiness. So you remember newscasters in the 20th century, that's like a very classic image that many of us have of trusting news sources and trusting broadcasters. One thing that I propose in my book is that by calling the feed on Facebook or on Instagram or on Twitter, by calling it a news feed, we're stealing that trust that was built up by actual journalists over a very long period of time, over hundreds of years. So that trust then is translated over to the digital sphere. And what we found over and over again is that many people are naive. They're digitally naive, right? Every day is somebody's first day on the internet. But what happens when somebody is viewing this feed thinking that's what they're supposed to see, or that's what's right, or that's what is most important, it can easily be used to push propaganda or to push a certain message, basically by the whim of the platform itself or a deep-pocketed advertiser.
Mm-hmm. And then a follow-up question I have for you is along this lines of, and what's really interesting is because you have like these communities where it's like whatever resonates with your views, it'll push those up. And so what you start to see in your feeds, you believe is like real. So if you think UFOs or like the government is hiding or is lying to you about aliens or things, you start to believe that because that's what it's showing in your feeds. So along those lines, there's a lot of different things. So for example, what is black hat marketing?
Yeah, sure. And I think we're thinking about two concepts here. The first part of what you address is really the filter bubble, which is this idea that the more you engage with certain content, the feed itself will learn. And engagement doesn't have to be actually pressing or commenting. It could be, what is the content central to your viewport? And is it there for a greater amount of time relative to other content? So if you are interested in one type of content over another, you'll be shown more of it, which creates this, like you said, circular state, an echo chamber type scenario where you're only shown the same thing. And within that bubble, in the extremities, some of it may be very radical types of thought. So we've seen this in terms of political discourse, but I can give an example from this week. There was a fire in my hometown, and I'm not particularly interested in fires or firefighting, but because I spent a long time engaged with this particular image that was shared, my Facebook feed today was totally filled almost top to bottom with content of buildings being on fire. And this is maybe an innocent thing, even though fires are not a joke. It's okay. There's some fires. They think that I like firefighting, but you can see how it can take somebody on this path that ultimately may be dangerous. If we think about other types of food, and there is, of course, the controversy on TikTok, which was well explored by the Wall Street Journal, which is encouraging teenage girls to pursue unhealthy eating habits. And that was a huge expose done by the Wall Street Journal. And this all comes back to the concept of filter bubbles. And then as far as black hat marketing, I think it also plays into it too, where for black hat marketing, if you're willing to break the rules as a marketer, in certain ways, you can exploit the same logic for your own gain of your own clients or even products you're selling yourself.
Interesting. And so along those lines, if, for example, like you say something like, for example, if you're a YouTuber, right? And sometimes you watch these videos, and a lot of like big time YouTubers, they're very careful with certain words that they don't say that, because they know that if it gets picked up by the algorithm, they'll get regulated by the YouTube. Talk about shadow ban. Are shadow bans real? Is this a form of algorithmic censorship? And what can we do?
Yeah, I think the YouTube example is perhaps one of the most important to analyze. And it's something where that type of censorship inspired the book, because my point is that we have journalists fighting the big stuff. We have very few people actually analyzing these, what I call micro enforcements. So we have laws in the land, right? Every country has laws, and certain precedents have come up through the court system over the last couple of years, such as far as the copyright laws, like different aspects of copyright law is scraping, legal, things of that nature. But why this is important for content creation is that things are moving in a certain direction and nobody's really keeping track of it. So things that we see on YouTube today and we think, hey, I remember 10 years ago, this was fine. But now you have even shows that maybe post body cam footage from firefighters or from police body cams, especially. Almost all of those channels are demonetized because of certain aspects of violence or whatever that isn't particularly gruesome, but that has it. When you think about the platforms, they have a duty to advertisers. And as they become more dependent on advertisers, any advertiser with large enough or deep enough pockets or a large enough budget can start to dictate what is and is not appropriate beyond legality, just as far as messaging. So that's things like, like ads for gambling or ads for certain types of products in the nutritional supplement space, which I'm sure you have some awareness of, things such as financial products. Really, the point I make is that any advertiser could drastically change what is shown on a platform by effectively redefining the standards or guidelines for what's allowed to be shown. And I think it's a really big issue. This type of manipulation or censorship is present across the internet. Like we see it I give the example of Wikipedia, which everyone thinks to be this very middle of the road, fact-based encyclopedia on the web, which gets like billions of page views every year. But in their appeals for funding, which people make fun of, it's like a satirical thing at this point. People have a lot of negative feedback towards how outward Wikipedia is in its appeals. Most people miss that they equate raising any money with this censorship and with this type of bias that they do not want to introduce into their fact-based encyclopedia. So all this, and different platforms, we see different things, but over the last few years, there has certainly been a squeeze that draws more people into the fray, where people who used to be able to make money in the content business no longer can.
And what is the dead internet theory? What is that?
Yeah, I think it feeds somewhat into the dead internet theory, which was basically this very fringe, I guess you could say, a conspiracy theory that originated in a web forum a few years ago. And when we talk about black hat marketing and censorship and bots and AI, I know you've had a few people on the podcast around AI and automation. It's really the outgrowth of all of these things. And as originally proposed, it was this concept or this belief system that the majority, if not the entirety, of everything that we see on the internet is actually bots or is facilitated by bots. So today we know that the feeds themselves are curated by machines, right? There's no human at Facebook going back and forth. Whereas in 2007, the front page of YouTube was curated by a human. So that's one difference. But when we think about what AI does today and why it's given this new life, or what I would say is the second wave of the dead internet theory, is that now almost anybody can create believable content, either text, photo, or even video, that seems plausible on the internet, which means if it's your first day on the internet, there's certain things that you simply would not be able to tell the difference between human and AI generated or AI augmented, especially. So why does it mean the internet is dead? It means that eventually, if all of these sources of inorganic content are able to proliferate, humans will be so outnumbered that the internet is largely just bots talking to bots. It's essentially just an exchange of bot engagements. And this is a problem because then the bots can be wielded. You think about advertising. When you see an ad today, usually you know that it's an ad, but not always. But the thought is that if it's so overwhelming and so saturated with bot activity, pretty much everything's an ad or everything's propaganda because it doesn't represent an actual human experience. And that is what kills the internet, or that is what deadens what we love about Web 2.0.
Interesting. And what are your thoughts? Is AI just going to make this, is it going to add fuel to the fire, or is it going to help benefit in some ways? What are your thoughts based on your writings?
Yeah, it's interesting to publish a book in 2025 because as there are probably about 8,000 books published every day on Amazon, I would estimate that over 10% of them are now heavily driven by AI, and probably 25% are augmented by AI. So I'm writing a book where I criticize AI in chapter 29, launching into a field where everyone uses AI for marketing. And many people use AI to actually write their books. So I think the future is pretty bleak for people creating original work, especially creatives, for those with more functional professional vocations, such as the software engineer, such as the accountant, such as the lawyer to some extent. A lot of this will be replaced by generative AI, certainly. So I think it's an issue, but it's also something very interesting where it's not as if companies will downsize by 90% in 1 year. It's not like certain professions will totally go away. There's a reason that humans haven't been eliminated the last 5 times that we said that this new tech product would eliminate jobs, right? Like it's a slower burn than that. And AI is still deeply flawed. But within the book, I think I make a case that while the internet is still alive, it's definitely on the downward trend, because regardless of your belief in the dead internet theory, we certainly do not believe in the opposite. We do not believe that the internet is becoming more human. And that's what gives way to conspiracies. If you don't believe it's becoming more human and more authentic, then it's likely becoming more robotic and less believable and authentic. So that's the point. And that's how AI is really driving, I think, creatives out of their creative industries, and also probably eroding the demand for a lot of just regular workers, regular employees too.
Yeah. It's interesting because you have this one view that basically if you're creative, it's harder and harder to make a living because these social media platforms are basically taking the lion's share. And then on the other hand, talking to other experts, they say that because AI is going to be so dominant that only the creatives, like the people that have the human element, are going to survive and thrive. Touching upon, because we got a new administration and he's a big proponent about we're gonna free speech, and then the other thing is the big idea at this year's South by Southwest was Web 3.0 and decentralization of social media, and Blue Sky is one of those examples. What are your thoughts on like a decentralized, basically, because Web 2.0 is basically your modern day gatekeeper. It's like the fortress. If you're not in there, if you're not Mark Zuckerberg or Bezos, you're pretty much excluded. So what are your thoughts on Web 3.0 and decentralization of social media and the web?
Yeah, Chris, I think it's a really good point, because you look at it and once you actually go and read through the terms and conditions, you realize not only are you not free to say what you'd like on social media platforms, but also you don't own anything on those platforms, whether that's your content, whether that's your name, image, likeness, whether that's your followers, which of course are very important for me and you. So what is the new frontier? Like, what should we do? Even before we were really saying that things needed to be decentralized, we had this concept of what free speech on the web might look like. One stunning reversal was that Reddit, in its original branding from Alexis, was that it was a proponent of free speech, and free speech in a very broad definition. Of course, as time has gone on, Reddit has not been that bastion of free speech. It's been under a lot of criticism, even allegations of aligning with one side or the other through various election cycles. And they largely backtracked, in fact, at one point saying Reddit never claimed to be a bastion of free speech, which was, as you can imagine, with the Reddit mob, which was like very rapidly disproved. One thing I address in chapter 9 of my book, which is called Punishing Crime, is this phenomenon of actual free speech alt tech platforms, which I would consider Blue Sky to be alt tech as well, in that a platform called Gab or Gab AI came up a couple of years ago, and it was saying, hey, we're protecting free speech by any means necessary. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, if you hear this is free speech and it's an alternative to X because I got banned by X or because I got kicked off Twitter, I got kicked off Instagram, the issue is that it attracts a lot of people who may be provocative or actually be involved in illegal behaviors. So that's where the line has to be drawn. And that's where Gab received a significant amount of criticism in its early days, where it was suddenly, it went from being free speech to this is a haven for extremists and for racists and other very negative terms. I've been on the platform, and I will say that it's not what I hoped it would be as far as this like very deep discussion platform, like kind of what Reddit could be. There is a lot of things on there that it just feels very, I would say, aligned with one side of the political spectrum without much of a care for actually deep discussions, the things that you can't really have these days on other platforms. So I think it's a big deal to figure it out, but it's always going to be a balance because there is always still some type of enforcement here. So even Gab, they ended up having to create their own payment processor because they were deplatformed essentially by Stripe and others. They ended up having to come up with their own like domain service host and everything like that. And you realize that there's a lot less freedom on the internet because only a few companies hold the keys, especially to payment processing. Today, there might be 20-ish processors that you could use in the United States, but they're all abiding by a set of criteria that are not set by them. They're actually sent by like merchants, such as like Visa, MasterCard, whatever. The people saying, hey, we're getting too many complaints about this type of business. We're getting too many disputes and fraud charges. This is no longer fine. And at one point in 2018, social media growth businesses became a restricted business on Stripe. When I checked the restricted businesses list, we were alongside people who sold hair extensions. And we thought, what's wrong with hair extensions? It happens to be a business that on the internet, there's a lot of fraud and there's a lot of chargebacks. Likewise, in the social media growth realm, there was an awful lot of fraud. There was an awful lot of at least lies and misleading marketing. And that led to restrictions. So the payment processors through this all have a lot of control. And when we think about Web 3.0 and decentralized stuff, we're probably going to run into similar problems if we cannot get mainstream people to either easily visit the sites or easily make payments on those sites.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah. And Reddit's after its IPO'd, now it's got VC, it's now beholden to shareholders. Obviously, it's not a free speech platform. It's whatever the VCs, the angels, and the shareholders want. And you touched on an important thing is when does speech become a political issue? Because politicians, obviously, if their constituents don't like a certain, they can try and get it banned or get it deplatformed. You saw this a lot with a lot of crypto platforms, which is raw with fraud and scams and bad actors. My final question is, why did you name your book Framed? It's an interesting title.
Yeah. For me, I was really looking at a lot of the books in the space. And as you can imagine, as I was writing it, I was also reading the classics and the contemporary titles and even really detailed blog posts, because I wanted to make sure that I was not like mirroring somebody else's writing. I didn't want to make it so that I was not penning an original work. And through my like exploration of this space, I realized that, first of all, cover design, all the covers look the same. Everybody is going to use some motif of the cell phone or of these little icons that you find on any social media platform. It was unavoidable. But in naming the book Framed, I borrowed a motif from early Web 2.0 and really the 2007, 2008, which is these websites that first started hosting media. The image wasn't spanning across the entire screen. It wasn't stretched to your entire view window. There was always a frame around it, like you would have a typical picture. And even earlier on Instagram, some of the filters or filter providers were actually providing these funny like borders to look like more traditional pictures. So when I picked the name Frame, I started to think about it both from the perspective of this indicates a transition from like old internet to new internet. It's also a framing in that it is like my take on something. And finally, it has a connotation in the world of true crime, which is that somebody could be framed for a crime. They could be charged with a crime because somebody set them up. And really what I explore through the book is not that I was framed for a crime, but it's that my interest in boosting my own popularity actually put me into a position where I was vulnerable and I could have been the subject of legal action. So it was really taking those three things and combining it with a motif that I think we're all used to seeing on our social media sites.
Yeah. And we have a final question from the audience because they talk about the book and it looks like they probably read the synopsis. And what they're asking, what is fake love, video game cheating, and bots? Why people are still buying fake followers? Talk about how the book addresses those.
Yeah, sure. So one of the taglines that I've used throughout promoting the book is fake likes, fake love, true story. And fake likes, when you hear that, you of course think of the digital world. But when you think about fake love, that can mean so many different things. And the reason that this is more of a memoir than an essay collection is that within the book, I actually analyze some of the relationships I've had in very ambiguous, anonymized terms and talk about how those relationships either did or did not interfere with either my business practices or this crazy world of social media. So some of the antisocial things, some of the harmful use, did that interfere with relationships in a way that some things could be actually branded as fake love? So I analyze fake likes, which we think of, okay, you go to a site, you press a button, you get 1,000 likes, and fake love, which is saying, do I have relationships in the real world, in the overworld, as I call it, that maybe are not legitimate? And then of course, the true story is that it's a book of, it's a nonfiction book. It's actually, everything actually happened. Nothing is fictionalized whatsoever. So thinking about some of the other terms and also some of the motifs on the cover, like why is there a half heart on the cover? That really is an homage to video games. And a lot of my experience here was that, when I was in high school in 2012 or 2011, the guys weren't using Instagram. They were playing video games. And when we were kids, Action Replay and Game Shark, these cheating programs, actually were taking out full page ads in gaming magazines, and in Blockbuster, you could go and it's advertised. So as kids, we were said, hey kid, play your game, have fun. That's what your new hobby is going to be of your generation. And then we were faced with these big advertisements that cheating was okay. So what I take was this experience in cheating, which began on the PlayStation 2 many years ago. And then I take it to actual applications of cheating in online RPG games. And I finally talk about the transition between cheating and trying to industrialize it, which is why I studied computer science to begin with. So I believe a lot of these have tangential relationships, not just in terms of social media, but just in terms of how our attitudes and the ethics of a lot of what we do have changed from my time as a kid to now as a 30-year-old who's written this book and has spent 10 years in industry.
Yeah. How can people connect with you and check out the book and learn more from you?
Yeah, for sure. I have copies right here, Framed: A Villain's Perspective on Social Media. I know it'll get blurred out, but the best way to connect with me and learn more is to sign up for my mailing list. It's Tim O'Hearn at Beehive. The book right now for the next week or so is still going to be priced at 99 cents for the Kindle copy, and the paperback is selling for $15. Both of these are prices that I made mainly for my fans and mainly for longtime supporters, because this is a really important topic. It's something that I want to get out there more so than it is a money-making endeavor. So when I put it all together, I think about what we could do from the next stage if we have more people interested in social media and really the social aspects of the internet. Currently, the book is the #1 bestseller for social aspects of the internet on Amazon, and I'm happy to share it with more people.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much for coming on, and keep up the great work. And the links will be in for the audience. And again, I really enjoyed this conversation, and thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks, Christopher. It was a pleasure.